Conservative candidates sign a contract with Texas, a blueprint to bring the Texas House further to the right.
We are trying to reform the House, and my goal is to make it Republican once again.
A move to challenge current leadership and diminish House Democrats, fueling division under the dome.
There's an old saying in the building that you either respect us or you expect us, right?
We take an in-depth look at the contract and what it could mean for state policy. Plus, there's new progress in the plan to bring more electricity to the Texas power grid. A groundbreaking gets attention from the governor as the state looks to meet growing demand for power. And a new study shows people in charge of our elections are quitting their jobs.
If you really want to have secure and accessible elections, you need to provide election officials the resources they need to do it well.
The results show voter behavior may be contributing to the problem. We dig into the report and possible solutions.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. Big news from the Texas Senate as Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick issued his list of interim charges. Patrick gave state senators 57 items to study before the next legislative session. A few of the charges focus on housing affordability, including how it relates to homelessness. A different charge calls for evaluating how large-scale purchases of homes by investors affect home prices. Governor Abbott relayed a similar concern earlier this spring. Other big interim charges include border security, like the effect Operation Lone Star has had on personnel, energy infrastructure, including managing the grid in relation to the state's population growth. Patrick also wants reports on how artificial intelligence will affect Texas and how to regulate the technology. He's also asking senators to examine hemp products like Delta 8 and Delta 9. That could lead to tougher regulations on the sale of those products. Patrick called for reports and recommendations on all the interim charges by December 1st. There's a new push for big changes in the Texas House. Some conservative challengers released what they call a contract with Texas. It promises to overhaul House leadership and to prevent Democrats from chairing committees. Capitol correspondent Ryan Chandler breaks down what it could mean for public policy in Texas.
The House floor is closed right now for restoration, which is fitting because some of its most conservative occupants are pushing for this House to get a remodel in more ways than one.
Texans are fundamentally annoyed, frustrated, disappointed with the obstruction, the dysfunction within the Texas House.
Some of the most conservative candidates and lawmakers pledging big change in the Texas House.
That's why I think you saw an absolute earthquake of primary successes of conservative Republican challengers just defeating all over the state.
The contract with Texas vows to remove all Democrats from committee chairs, put term limits on the Speaker, and consider all Republican bills before any Democratic ones. This may all sound like inside baseball, I know, but if the tenets of this contract are accepted under a new Speaker, it could lead to sweeping policy changes statewide.
Fundamentally, the border security bill,
The ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying,
the ownership of real estate in the state of Texas by China.
the Texas Title 42 Act, the Border Protection Unit Act.
We were unable to pass school choice.
A lot of things left on the to-do list. That is, if Democrats don't step in the way.
You either respect us or you expect us.
See, some votes on the big bills require 100 votes, not a simple majority. Republicans only have 86. The Democratic leader says if you sideline them, you'll face the consequences.
Sometimes you need 100 votes. And so I'd be careful what you ask for.
Ryan Chandler, State of Texas.
We want to dig deeper into the potential impact of the contract with Texas. You heard a little from State Representative Brian Harrison, a Republican who signed the contract. Ryan spoke in depth with Harrison about why he believes the House needs to change its leadership and the way it does business.
Not a lot of Texans follow the Texas House very closely. So just explain the problems that you've seen in your sessions in the House and the types of changes that you think are needed.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the Texas voters. I think voters' eyes are being opened like never in the history of our state to the complete corruption, dysfunction, and betrayal of the voters at the hands of elected so-called Republicans in the Texas House. And I was shocked to find this right after I got elected, after having served in the DC swamp for President Trump. I assumed every elected Republican in Texas was as willing to fight the swamp as hard as as we were in the Trump administration. But what did I find out? I found out that all these elected Republicans in Texas, once they get in office, behind closed doors, they sell their voters out. They empower the radical Democrats they have pledged to fight, and they collude with them to destroy liberty. And what we're trying to do here with this contract and with this initiative right here is to put the voters back in charge, be responsive to the will of the voters that have elected Republicans to the governor's office, the lieutenant governor's office, huge majorities in the Senate, huge majorities in the House, and every statewide office in the state of Texas. We are trying to reform the House, and my goal is to make it Republican once again.
So it sounds like the problem is not even the Democrats, it's the Republicans.
Well, anybody who thinks that I'm only critiquing the Democrats has not been paying attention.
Of
Republicans have a massive majority in the Texas House. Democrats couldn't even pass a birthday resolution, okay, if Republicans didn't help them because there's not enough of them. Every liberal, pro-big government socialist bill that passed, and there were many, passed because of the failed so-called Republican leadership team of Dave Phelan and his liberal lieutenants. And every Republican priority that died, the Democrats aren't responsible for that. They try to blame the Democrats. That's a convenient foil. That's an excuse. When liberal bills pass and when conservative bills die, I want to be very clear. It is the responsibility of the people who are culpable are the failed liberal leadership team of Dave Phelan and the liberal Republicans that he has empowered.
Let's talk about who can take the mantle next then. First, I know it's really an open question now, but let's assume that Speaker Phelan survives his runoff. Do you think that he's reelected Speaker?
Well, I don't know. I don't think so. I think even a lot of his committee chairmen, multiple of his committee chairmen have already moved on from him. So I think he's going to lose. And by the way, I'm going to do everything I can to help make sure he loses. But if he wins, it's maybe a fair question. Look at all the liberal Republicans he has written massive checks to. The Speaker of the House has handed out millions of dollars purchasing support. And that's why it's one of the things that the coalition of over 20 current and future members is committed to doing is stopping that practice, not letting speakers dole out millions of dollars in political contributions so that they can buy votes for themselves, to decentralize power and make the Texas House more representative and a more democratic body.
Have you considered jumping into the speaker's race?
Like I told you, there's a long way to go. I will tell you, people are asking me to do that, but as far as I'm concerned, I am focused on reforming the Texas House so that who the individual speaker is less important than it is today, which is right now it's basically run like a dictatorship. We need to decentralize power and put power back in the hands of the voters of the great state of Texas, who we're all honored to serve.
The Conservatives' contract aims to further reduce the influence of Democrats in the Texas House, so it's no surprise that the chair of the House Democratic Caucus opposes the idea. But he told us the reasons go beyond basic party politics.
I have a spoiler alert for the representatives who have signed their names to this contract. I mean, going back to the days of Sam Houston, there have always been participants from both parties or from multiple parties at the leadership table. That is the process of the Texas House. It's a deliberative body. And if those representatives don't like it, I'm sure they can find a vacancy in Congress. They can fly to Washington and go work up there, because that's where divisiveness and that's where all of this hyper-partisan rhetoric, that's where it actually fits, in Washington, not in Austin.
If, let's say, Speaker Phelan loses his runoff, just for the sake of argument, and a speaker is elected that supports this contract, how should Democrats respond if they lose their committee chairs?
I mean, I tell you what, I mean, my job as caucus chair is to stay in touch with the members. I have not come across a single member who's willing to support anybody who's campaigning on the premise that Democrats will have no say, no voice in the Texas House. So what I will say is that when it comes to electing a presiding officer in the Texas House, there is one rule and one rule only, and that is who can get to 76 first. History has demonstrated that it's those folks who are counting numbers on both sides of the fence, both sides of the aisle. That's the way it's always worked. And so if you want some cheap advice from the peanut gallery, I think that is a recipe for success.
The other consideration here is that for a lot of the biggest things the legislature does, Republicans don't have the votes to do it alone, right? Any 2/3 majority requirement. Do you see that as potential leverage that Democrats could have?
I think anybody who has observed the inner workings of the legislature recognize that it takes both parties with a pragmatic vision to come together to work on some of the best solutions that we have. We already have a Senate chamber where one party and frankly one person seems to be in control of the entire building. That doesn't seem to work very well. The Texas House has become the deliberative body, the adults in the room. And when you have adults in the room, you're going to have a variety of perspective. And when you have that perspective, you're sometimes doing the best work you can. When you walk into a legislature and you're trying to sideline 64 and what could be a larger number of Democrats on day one, yeah, it's going to be pretty hard to get things done, especially on those tough votes that you need 100 to get anything done. And that's even taking a vote to go home for the weekend. Sometimes you need 100 votes. And so I'd be careful what you ask for, because you might find out that this is not, these aren't the rose-colored glasses you're looking through, and all of a sudden things are a lot different.
There's much more to dig into about the conservative contract and the potential fallout. You can read more about the contract and watch our full interviews with some of the key players in this issue. Just look for the link on our website in this week's State of Texas story.
What is happening here is actually part of an intense effort by the state to add more power to the grid.
Bipartisan legislation boosts the effort to bring more power to the Texas grid, and there could be more help coming from the Capitol. Accusations of bullying lead to a lawsuit against a Texas school district. We look closer at the case that led a family to leave their home and what comes next.